All right, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning. Good tevach. Hope you have a beautiful Shabbos, uplifting Shabbos. Yishkoach to Rav Kalman Akiva for delivering a beautiful shir yesterday. We are picking up in Eretz Hashem today, Daf Mem Aleph. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Stephen Tarizin, for dedicating all the shir and drushos this month in loving memory of Terry's father, Tzvi Hirsch ben Yosef HaKohen. To thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the shir and drushos this month in commemoration of the yard site of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah ben Zechariah and Dina Bas Pesach. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Dr. Ron and Mrs. Gartenhouse, Dr. and Mrs. Gartenhouse, for dedicating the learning this week in the Schus of Refuah Shalima for Natan ben Rivka. And our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Adam Plunkum, commemoration of the yard site of Harav Moshe ben David, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. We hope that at the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos Havan Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Now, with that, let us begin. So we are picking up, let's pick up from the top of Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph. First, literally again, top of the line. Visu. Is Sakadaitcha ki avim malaket britani mitzvah ka'avid. Midalo Kasiv Tar. So we'll say, so remember, we're focusing now again on the fascinating topic regarding the concluding shaving rites of the Nazir. Specifically focusing on the instrument or utensil used for that particular shaving. So we'll say, so take a quick look at the Rush. A quick look at the Rush. So the Rush says as follows, Visu, I avid b'malakeh. So again, if you were to think that halacha l'maisa, again, you could go ahead and do the final shaving with a type of plane. So midalok siv tar kreish lakish kilomar. Look at the Rush. First Rush, left hand margin. Kilomar ilav ikar mitzvah betar lo dochi lav dahashchasas zikan kevan de'ev shalakayim shneim kidreish lakish. So I will say this is a very important idea. Work not, the Gemara says, work not for the fact. We're not for the fact that halacha l'maisa, again, now the truth is, we should point out over here, and Rashi points this out, this is actually specifically referring to the shaving of the Metzora, not the shaving of the Nazir. So again, if you jump around a little bit here, look at Rashi for just a moment. So remember again, if you were to think that the final shaving of a Metzora could be done ultimately again with a type of plane and wouldn't require a razor, then essentially, how would the use of a razor be permitted at all? After all, we have a concept of Reish Lakish Da'amar, back to the Gemara, Kol makom she'ata motzi aseh v'lo saseh. So we'll say this is an incredible idea. Any situation in which you find a conflict between an aseh and a lo saseh. So we'll say, so what's that? Now, in other words, essentially what we're saying is like this. Any time where the performance of an aseh seems to be at odds with the performance or the violation of a lo saseh, so what's the halacha? If you're able somehow to go ahead and balance both of them, fantastic. The imlav, and if not, yavo aseh v'yitcha es lo saseh. Rather, Rabbi say again, we have this concept in halacha of aseh docha lo saseh. Aseh docha lo saseh. So I will say, so just to formulate the argument over here, the Gemara is saying it must be that a Metzora must shave his head with a razor. Why? Because we'll say if it was just optional to use a razor, then what should be the halacha? If it was just optional to use a razor, then what? You shouldn't be able to use it. Why? Because I will say the use of a razor, and again we're going to more explicitly discuss in just a moment, the use of a razor on the head and on the face, for that matter, is an issue of hashchasas peos or hashchasas zakon, right? Either to go out and destroy your peos, right, or to destroy the beard. You're not allowed to use a razor for shaving purposes. Now, again, on a technical level, again, a razor could be used just from a halachic perspective. In certain scenarios, you could use a razor to shave your neck. You could use a razor to shave the back of your neck. The issue is the use of a razor, again, at 5 specific points. Again, by the, I don't know what you call this area right over here. Temples, I guess, yeah, temples, right? The jawbones, and the chin, right? That's an Isser D'Oraisa. And by the payas, and again, by the head is to use a razor again by the area of the payas. So halacha l'maisa, again, the Gemara suggesting is like this. The Gemara suggesting is, if indeed it was optional to go ahead and use a razor for the head shaving of the metzora, you didn't have to, but it's a possibility. It wouldn't make sense because the use of a razor for the shaving of one's head is an isser da'araisa, and therefore I say, by the way, in the metzora, as opposed to the nazir, remember again, the metzora is a full body shaving, as opposed to the nazir, which is just the head. So halacha l'maisa, again, it would represent an isser da'araisa. So now, if you tell me that a razor is required, fine. Because then what do we have over here? What do we have over here? We have an asay and a los asay. So whenever the only way to perform the asay is through violation of a los asay, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? Do it. Do it. But, says Reish Lakish, if efshel l'kayim shnehem, if you could perform the asay without violating the los asay, then of course do that. So the fact that a razor could be used by the metzora must indicate to us that it's not optional, ultimately again, but mandatory. That was, I'll just point out that Rabbi Nachman says so beautifully. What's the concept, right? So we know that, and by the way, the concept of asay doche los asay is a halacha l'maisa concept. Rabbi Nachman says it's also a hashkafa l'maisa concept. So what does this mean? In the world of spiritual growth, right? What's the proper trajectory? So David HaMelech already spells it out for us. David HaMelech says it's sur meira v'aseh tov. Right? The goal in life really is to identify the negative things that are holding me back, deal with those, literally again, veer away from the evil, and then do good. Because the problem is, if I start with the asay tov, and then don't deal with the sur meira, which of course is so tempting, because it's always much more exciting to like take on dynamic, beautiful, new initiatives and things, and much more difficult, and I'm much more reticent to deal with my baggage. The problem is, if you don't go ahead and deal with your baggage, it's like what Chazal call tovel v'sheretz biyado. You're going into the mikveh doing all these wonderful things, but you're still holding on to the source of impurity. Rabbi Nachman says it's true. In an ideal world, the rate to growth, the path to growth is sur meira v'aseh tov. The Rebbe says there's only one thing. We often don't live in an ideal world. So what do I do? Let's say, and we know that there are times in life I can't deal with my baggage. That's an actual statement, by the way, right? There are times in life where I can't deal with my. I know what it is. I've identified it. I even know it has to change. I know how it has to change. We saw this on Thursday night, the Chassidus Chabura, but I'm just not ready to do it. I'm just not ready, or I don't feel able to do it. So what do you do in that type of situation? The Rebbe says it's okay. Asay doche los asay. The Rebbe says. Sometimes again, although it is ideal to deal with your low sa'asays before your asays. Sometimes in life, what you need to get moving is just a little positive momentum, right? Sometimes you just got to start going. You just got to start doing anything. The Rebbe says that's the yesod of asay, something positive, spiritually dynamic, docha lo sa'asay. Can help you rid yourself of some of the negativity. So in the ideal world, sur meira v'aseh tov, b'di'evet, if you're not ready for that, aseh dochelos aseh. Rabbi Nachman, incredible. Rabbi Eliezer, my taima. Shabbos says, so where does Rabbi Eliezer learn his concept? That namely, that the taglachas of a metzora, that the shaving of a metzora is ultimately again done with a razor. Where does he learn this from? Yolif meirosho. He learns that from the word rosho. What's the word rosho? The sanya, because we learned rosho, the pasuk is rosho. Shabbos says, so this again is talking about by the metzora. Just the pasuk in its entirety is, V'hayo b'yom hashvi, yigaloch es kol sa'aro, es rosho, v'es zikano, v'es kabos enov, v'es kol sa'aro yigaleach. So I will say, it's interesting because the pasuk itself, as we're going to see, really seems to be repetitive. The Torah says, on the seventh day, he'll go ahead and shave off all of his hair. And then it says, his head, his beard, his eyebrows, right? All of his hair. So I will say, so why does the Torah have to say Rosho, not Talmud Lomar? Why does it have to say Rosho by the Nazir? So watch this. So the Pishanem Argabe Nazir, Tar lo Yavra al Rosho. So I will say, by a Nazir, during his Neder Nazirus, the Torah says a razor may not come upon his head. So the Gemara says, so Tari Rosho, Yochol af Nazir Mitzora came. I might have thought that the same halach applies to a Nazir Mitzora. They both say, who's a Nazir Mitzora? on a simple level, a guy with a lot of tzaras, right? But on a deeper level, right? Nazir is just like it sounds like, right? He's a Nazir who contracted tzaras. So now, here's what's fascinating. A Nazir Mitzorah runs into a fascinating issue, which is, he's in the middle of his Neder Nazirus. He's closing out the purification process for his saras. Part of the purification process for his saras is what? Head shaving. I mean, it's body shaving, right? But from the Nazir perspective, it's head shaving. So we'll say, so now what does he do? So that's the drush over here. So the Gemara says, I might have thought when the pasuk says Tar lo yavra al rosho, that a Nazir is not permitted to cut his hair. Yochol af Nazir mitzora kain. I might have thought that the same halach applies to a Nazir who is a mitzora. Talmud lomar rosho. Therefore, the pasuk says ultimately rosho, which Rabbi Eliezer is darshaning to teach me that halacha l'maisa, a Nazir who is a mitzora does in fact shave his head for the concluding rituals of tzaras. So the Gemara says, Mimai. The Gemara says, how do you know this? Mimai. So the Gemara says, actually, if you take a look at the rush for, actually, not yet. So the Gemara says, Mimai. So Dilma, the Olam afilu, likto b'malake tibri tani mitzakavid. But one second, maybe when Mitzorah shaves his head, who says that he has to use a razor? Maybe even if he just uses some type of plane, that should be enough. V'chi tema tar lama li lememra. So if that's the case again, then why even mention razor? To which the Gemara says, maybe to teach me, lememra da filu b'tar, so that maybe the halacha said to teach you that you can even use a razor, because after all, sagadait chamino, hoil v'gabe nazir, ki avid b'tar mechayiv. So we'll say, I might have thought like this. When a Nazir goes ahead and cuts his hair, shaves his head, not at the conclusion of his Nazirus, but during the duration of his Nazirus. If he goes and he cuts his hair, he's going to be chayiv. Maybe the Mitzorah ultimately, again, should be chayiv as well. Kamash malam delo. Kamash know that when the Mitzorah cuts his hair, shaves his head with the razor, there is no liability for that. I want to say, take a quick look at the rush for just a moment. So the rush is about 15 lines up from the bottom. Mitzorah nami mechayiv imhu nazir umishani im isa de'ein taglachas mitzorah dafka betar lo dachi kevan da'afshem laki three. Turning climb shneim kedesh lakish. Fine. So we'll see that in just a moment. So the Gemara says as follows: Isaka daitra ki avim laki v'retani mitzvah ka'avid midlo kas of tar. Because we'll say at the end of the day, if you would have thought that the Mitzorah, at the end of his purification process, if he were to be able to cut his hair with something other than a razor, i.e. some type of plane, and that would in fact satisfy the criteria, then what Rabbi say? We go back to Reish Lakish's point. Remember again, what's Reish Lakish's point? Whenever you have a clash between an aseh and a lo saseh, what's ta'alacha? Well, actually, let me take that back. Whenever a clash between an aseh and a lo saseh, we have two possibilities. Possibility one is, if there is a way to go ahead and perform the aseh without violation of the lo saseh, then what? Then that's your obligation. The only time the aseh is going to be docha the lo saseh is when the performance of the aseh is impossible without the violation of the lo saseh. But if indeed, now both circling back, if indeed it was possible for the Mitzorah to go ahead and shave his head with something other than a razor, then of course what will be the halacha? He can't use a razor. Fine. So we're just circling back. V'Rabbanan, hi Rosho my darshibe. So we'll say this is great. What did the Rabbanan do with Rosho? So remember again, Rabbi Eliezer is coming to teach me that halacha l'maisa, Rosho comes to teach me that the Mitzorah, as part of his purification process, has to use a razor. Okay? The Rabbanan have a separate drasha for that. So halacha l'maisa, what do the Rabbanan do with Rosho? So this is fascinating. My darshibe, mi boy lehu lemitchi lav dahakafa. So Rabbi said this is very interesting. So the Rabbanan use the word Rosho. Rosho, Rabbi say, is the license to violate the lav of hakafa. Rabbi say hakafa is the lav of removing your payas. Now watch this. Let's go through the drasha. The Sanya, really very interesting. The Sanya, lo sakifu pa'as rashechem. So I'll say the pasuk says, literally translated, you're not allowed to round out the corners of your head. So the Gemara says, Yachol af mitzorakin. Now, both say, what I want to point out is something very interesting. We're going to see this in the Gemara. I'm going to tell it to you now also. The way when you look at the Sefer HaChinuch, on this pasuk, what's the problem here? Right, Torah is telling me I can't literally shave the sides of my head. It's telling me about rounding out the corners of my head. So shaving what's the pshat? So the Sefer HaChinuch on this mitzvah says because people used to do this in order to mimic the priests of Avodah Zarah. So I'll say it's actually interesting. The priests of Avodah Zarah would have this haircut where essentially they'd have hair on the top and they would shave off. It's like, you see like certain monks like this, no? Like a bowl cut, right? So right, you have just hair on the top and the whole side is shaved. So I will say, according to the Sefer HaChinuch, that was the reason for this prohibition. That was the common haircut of the Avodah Zarah, the clergy of Avodah Zarah. So therefore, again, that's what the Torah says, Lo sakifu pa'as rashechem. Fine. So both say, now watch this. So here's what's interesting. So Yachol af mitzora. So on one hand, the Torah tells me you cannot shave your head. You cannot shave your head. So I'll say, if that's the case, Yachol af mitzora, I might have thought that this applies to the mitzora as well. Talmud Lomar, Rosho. Therefore, we'll say, no, the Torah tells you the Mitzora has to shave his head. Has to shave his head. Rosho is. So the Gemara says, Talmud Mitzora, Kain Talmud Lomar Rosho. So the Gemara says, one second. B'lamali lemichtav Rosho, Seifokle Mizikano. So we'll say, but one second, remember we pointed this out before? The pasuk by Mitzora goes into a lot of specificity. So the Torah is already telling me that the Mitzora has to shave his beard. Well, what's already telling me that the Mitzvah has to shave his beard? And I both remember again, the shaving of the beard with a razor is its own biblical prohibition. So biblical prohibition. So I'll say, by the way, I'll say it's important to note that again, in general, with this discussion about even shaving the beard, there's a whole discussion about what does it apply to. Is it only a razor or any type of shaving? So again, interesting machloksim over here that are beyond our scope. But Lamaisa, the Torah, the Gemara says as follows. So why do you need Rosho altogether? After all, just learn out from Zikano. The fact that the Torah is going ahead and telling the Mitzvah that's what? That he could shave his beard, tells us that Mitzora kind of supersedes any of these other biblical prohibitions of shaving the beard or the head. So essentially, once you know that he could shave the beard, right, that with a razor, that essentially tells me that he could shave his head as well. So why Rosho? Why do you need Rosho at all? Why do you need Rosho at all? So the Gemara says, V'seifach lim is called Desanya, Zikano. The pasuk says that the Mitzvah shaves his beard. Not Talmud Lomar. What's the chiddush in that? Here it is. Shene'amar upekas upeas zikanon lo yigalechu. So I say the Torah gives a biblical prohibition to shaving your beard. You're not allowed to shave your beard with a razor. Salach l'meisa again. The Torah is telling me that's a biblical prohibition. Af Mitzora king. You might have thought that therefore Mitzora is prohibited from doing so as well. Talmud Lomar zikano. Therefore, the pasuk tells me his beard, which teaches me that halacha l'maisa, the mitzora is permitted to go ahead and shave his beard even with a razor. So the Gemara says, now watch this. Watch this. Lama li l'michtav rosho, v'lama li l'michtav zikano. So I'll say, so now I'm left with a fundamental issue, which is, why do I need both? In other words, we'll say, the prohibition to shave your beard with a razor and shave your head with a razor are like sister concepts. So essentially, once I know that one of them is permitted, then logic should dictate that's what? The other is permitted as well. If that's the case, halacha l'maisa, I don't need both Rosho and Zikano. Just tell me one of them, and I can easily extrapolate the other. So it says, by the way, I just want to point out, we've switched gears over here. This is all by Mitzora now, right? This is not by Nazir. This is all by Mitzora. So the Gemara says, Lama li l'michtav Rosho, Lama li l'michtav Zikano. We'll say 3 lines up from the bottom, Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. Here we go, Tzrichi. You need both, and I'll tell you why. Here we go. Di kasav Rachmana Zikano, v'lo kasav Rosho. If the Torah would have just said that the Mitzora shaves his beard and didn't give me a license to shave his head, I would have said, there's a very simple reason. Havamina, da kafas kol Rosho, lo shma hakafa. They both say, if you remember again, we spoke about this last week. So there's an interesting machlokes, I will say, about the following. what happens if a person doesn't just shave the sides of their head, but rather what? They shave their head in its entirety, right? Take a razor to the whole head. Is that a violation of the law of Havakaf? And I will say, now, based on the Sefer HaChinuch that I told you, you see it's an interesting shaila. Why is it an interesting shaila? Because the Sefer HaChinuch understands that the law of Havakaf was really to resemble the idolatrous clergy. Well, they were dafka leaving hair on the top. I don't know why I keep doing that, right? You know what I'm saying? They were leaving hair. I have the reverse. I'm so firm, I have a reverse haircut. Right? That's the mamish, right? So let's say, so the Maisa, right? They dafka shaved the sides in order to go ahead and leave the top. So therefore, you might have thought hakafas kol harosh, which is again shaving the whole head. Maybe it's not allowed d'oraisa at all. That's the Havamina. To which the Gemara says, Havamina hakafas kol shlosh ma'akafa lahachi kasav rachmana rosho. So we'll say, now watch this. Therefore, watch this drasha. The Torah is trying to teach us that even if you shave the entire head, it's still an issa d'oraisa. This is always the interesting part, again, in general, when you look for shrash mitzvah, when you look for reasons behind the mitzvah, right? Whenever the Sefer HaChinuch give us reasons, so the reasons are always there to give us an appreciation, but the appreciation and understanding is never the totality of the mitzvah. So here's a perfect example, right? The Sefer HaChinuch says, the prohibition to cut the corners of your head with a razor is so as not to resemble the Ovdei Avodah Zarah. That being, if that was the sole reason of the mitzvah, then halacha l'maisa hakafas kalarosh, shaving of the entire head should be permitted, because that does not resemble the Kodesh Avodah Zarah. But yet we know that hakafas kalarosh is still in Isser Da'araisa. Still in Isser Da'araisa. So therefore, again, because it's an Isser Da'araisa, what do you need? The word Rosho is where the Torah says to the Nazir, to the Mitzorah, do it anyway. Right? So I'll say the word Rosho teaches me that even though Hakafas Kala Rosh is still in Isser Da'oraisa, Rosho is the biblical mandate to do it nevertheless. So I'll say, what is this a case of? This is a case of an asay, dochelos asay. Asay dochelos asay. Lachikas rachman Rosho. So therefore, I will say, I need Rosho to teach me what? Rosho teaches me that even though Hakafas Kala Rosh is an Isser Da'oraisa, the Mitzorah still has to shave his entire head with a razor. Fine, I'm a base. V'i kasav Rosho, v'lo kasav Zikano. On the other hand, if the Torah would have just said Rosho and not Zikano, not the beard, Havamina mashmatarti. So I'll say the mashmatarti. I would have thought that ultimately, so Rosho comes to include everything. Right? So I will say, so if you take a look, right? So mashmatarti, the asi asay, v'dachias lo sasay. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Uvamashma da kafas kalarosh shma hakafa. So I will say, watch this. The Gemara says, you're right. Had we just said Rosho could have really been one-stop shopping. Right? What would Rosh have taught me? Say, Rosh number one teaches me that what? Number one, halacha l'maisa, hakafas kala rosh. First of all, Rosh would have included zikano. In other words, once the Torah tells me that you shave your entire head, right, for the purposes of the concluding rites of the Mitzorah, if you could violate the law of Peis, you certainly could violate the law of what? Right? Pas zikanam lo sigalechu. Right? Of shaving the beard. So it's right. From Rosh I could have learned zikano. Not only that, what else do I learn from Rosh? Asiyasei v'dochalos asei. Right, I also know that halacha l'maisa again, the positive commandment of the Mitzorah going ahead and cutting his hair, right, goes ahead and is dochalos asei of payas and corners of the beard. So in reality, I could have learned out everything from Rosho. Rosho could have taught me everything. Number one, that akafas kala rosh shma akafa, cutting of the entire head, shaving the entire head is still an issa d'oraisa. I would have learned from Rosho that Rosho includes beard, and I also would have learned that asay dochalos asay. I could have learned all of that stuff from Rosho. If that's the case, vakati bitar minal, and I will say 3 lines up from the bottom, the mafam and base. And I will say, but what wouldn't I know? How do I know that it's done with a razor? Right, so I will say, so just to be clear over here, let's go through what would Rosho teach me, right? Number one, Rosho teach, let's go through the order. What does Rosho teach me? That the Mitzorah shaves his entire head, okay? So I will say, if he's shaving the entire head, I would also learn the license to what? Shave his entire beard. What else do I learn from here? That hakafas kala rosh shma hakafa. cutting of the entire head, shaving the entire head, right, is called still, in other circumstances, a violation of rounding out the corners. And number 4, what I would have learned was asi aseh v'docha lo saseh. Good. I could have learned all that out from Rosho. But I will say, what's missing? What's missing? Razor. How do I know that this has to be done with a razor? Vakati bitar minolon. I will say, at the end of the day, what I don't know, ultimately, again, is that it has to be done with a razor. So how do I know that it has to be done with a razor? Lahachi kazav rachmana zikano. I will say, therefore, halacha lamaisa, the pasuk writes zikano. Zikano teaches me, I will say, that what? That the shaving has to dafka be done with a razor. Now take a quick look at the rush. So the rush is on the right-hand margin, pretty much like in the middle there. Lahachi kasav rachmana zikano. Listen to this. Tishaminon mina, titaglachas mitzora bitar. So you'll ask yourself, well, 1 second, how does zikano teach me that the shaving is done with a razor? Right? How does that mean? Because as I think about it, if the shaving wasn't done with a razor, the Torah wouldn't have to permit something. Zikano, right? When the Torah is telling me about the shaving of the Nazir, Torah is not just simply telling me a halacha, because the halacha could have been learned out from Rosho. The Torah is being, what the drush of the Gemara is, the Torah is being matir something that is usher in all other circumstances. What's the thing that the Torah is being matir, right? What's the Torah is being matir? The use of a razor. The use of a razor. So zikano teaches me that you're allowed to use something on your beard that you're not allowed to use in any other circumstance. And what is that? That's the razor. That's the razor. Sefer Abbas, I just want to point out, this is an absolutely magnificently beautiful and riveting drasha. Shabbos say, what it turns out over here is like this. From the Metzora, it's just really fascinating. From the Metzora, here's what I know, right? We'll say, isn't it incredible, by the way, how we read these psukim in the Torah all the time, and you just go through them, and it's incredible, just like the depth and profundity to each. I will say, this, by the way, is probably very apropos because Purim, the Yom Tov of Purim is Kimo v'Kiblu. Purim was the second Kabbalah Satorah, and specifically, what Purim is Kabbalah Satorah of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? By Har Sinai we said Naaseh v'Nishma. So Naaseh is Torah Shebechsav, the written law. Nishma will hear about Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? Because that's going to be developed throughout the generations. Purim, the Kabbalah Satorah, right? The rededication of the Torah of Purim is dafka centered on Torah Sheba'al Peh. I will say, in this drasha is such a paradigmatic example of the beauty of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So let's put the whole drasha together. So what do I learn from the concluding rites of the Metzora? So number 1, Rosho. And in reality, I'm also going with the last version over here. What can I learn from Rosho? I will say, what can I learn from Rosho? The truth is, anything and everything you want out of life, you can get from Rosho, right? At least when it comes to Metzora, right? So I will say, so what does it teach me? It teaches me, number 1, that Allah Chalamaysa, the Nazir is going to be shaved. It could teach me that the Nazir is shaving what? Both his head and his beard. Because in reality, once you're allowed to remove the payas, by definition, I know I'm allowed to remove the beard as well. So everything could be learned out. Everything could be learned out from Rosho. What else does Rosho teach me? So number 1, it teaches me head and beard. Number 2, it teaches me that Allah Chalamaysa kafas kala rosh shmakav, which is how we pass in Allah Chalamaysa. Even if you shave your entire head, that is still a violation, ultimately, again, of the removal of the corners of the head. I also learn asay, dochel lo saseh, which is inherent, I will say, right? And this is a good example of Reish Lakish's halacha, right? Of asay, dochel lo saseh. So we'll say, what don't I learn? And what was the last thing I say? Dochalosa say, good. And we'll say, what else? What? So that's Rosho. Then it comes Zikano. What does Zikano come to teach me? Ta'ar, razor. How does Zikano teach me razor? Because if Torah has to go out of its way to say that you go ahead and remove the beard, it means it must be removing the beard in a way that would otherwise be usher. Namely, what? With a razor. So we'll say that's the entire drasha of Rosho and Zikano. Beautiful. Rabbi Eliezer. So we'll say, so now, okay, beautiful. So now, I just want to point out, according to this approach, the makar, the source of aseh docha lo saseh is Metzora. Right? I will say, because it's incredible. By the way, why is it Metzora? Also because Metzora has multiple asehs docha lo sasehs. When I say multiple, 2. Right? In other words, you're shaving your head, and you're shaving your beard. Now, the removal of the payas, right, and the removal of the corners of the beard are two different prohibitions. Yet, in the purification process of the Metzora, you're going to be violating both of them, right? Why? Because the assay of Metzora, or the assay of we'll call it the assay of Metzora, is docha the lo saseh of rounding out the corners and shaving off the beard. I will say, watch this, Rabbi Eliezer. The asya say v'dachi is lo saseh minole. Rabbi will say, where does Rabbi Eliezer learn that asay docha lo saseh? Right? So he's not learning out from here. So I guess this is beautiful. Where does he learn it out from? Yolith migdilim. Rabbi learns that from tzitzis. From tzitzis, very exciting. Very exciting. Tzitzis, why? Rabbi say, what does the pasuk say? The sanya lo silbash shatnis. The Torah says you're not allowed to wear shatnis. That's the pasuk. You're not allowed to wear shatnis. Now, right after the Torah says you're not allowed to wear shatnis, so just to give you the order of the psukim, Torah says, Lo silba shatnis, semer fish you can't wear shatnis, wool and linen mixed together. The very next pasuk is, Gidilim taseloch al arba kanfos ksuscha asher techaseba. The very next pasuk I will say is what? Make tzitzis. Make tzitzis. What do we learn from here? Hagidilim, top of Membeis, Hagidilim, Tasa Lacha Mehem. Rabbi say, what do we learn from here? We learn that halacha l'maisa, you can make tzitzis from shatnis. And Rabbi say, so I just want to point out this, by the way, this drasha. See, here, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I don't understand. How do you make that drasha? In other words, I understand they're juxtaposed, but from where, in other words, going back to Reish Lakish, I will say, Reish Lakish told us, when does asay docha lo saseh apply? When does it apply? When you can't do both, right? That's the operative piece over here. In other words, that halacha l'maisa, in other words, can you imagine, by the way, if a person at their whim could say asay docha lo saseh, just like for anything? Just like for anything, as whatever you imagine, like how much destruction, right, you could bring upon the world if you were just able to apply asay docha lo saseh at your whim. So obviously, Reish Lakish comes along and says, "Whoa, hold up. Asay docha lo saseh works when you cannot fulfill both, but if you can fulfill both, then halacha l'maisa asay is." So I'll say, so I don't understand. Where in the drasha do you see that tzitzis allows you to go ahead and violate shatnis? So we'll say, because there's another operative principle over here that the Gemara is not explicitly articulating, but it's understood, which is we're doresh smuchin. So we'll say darshaning smuchin is another exegetical principle where we analyze juxtapositions. Now we know that the placement of things in the Torah is not random. So now we'll say, I will point out, not everyone darshans smuchin. That's also machlokes. It's a machlokes. But obviously, again, this drasha is predicated on smuchin as well. So therefore, the fact that the Torah juxtaposes shatnis and tzitzis indicates to us what? That shatnis could even be made. Sorry, that tzitzis can be made shatnis. Well, I'll just point out to you, by the way, and I didn't really look into this much. The interesting, I think, even potentially, the more paradigmatic example of this would have been. We just had this. Big Day Kahuna. I will say Big Day Kahuna are explicitly shatnis. So that's an incredible example of asay docha lo saseh. Now, it could be very well that Torah doesn't bring that because that's also explicitly articulated by the Ribono Shel Olam. Possible, but l'maisa again, that's a case of shatnis. Also, maybe only applies to Kohanim, whatever it is. But I will say, I will tell you halacha l'maisa. This is how we paskin. Tzitzis can be made from shatnis. This is made from shatnis. So you could have a wool beged, linen tzitzis, or any combination of that. And halacha l'maisa against Rabbi Eliezer, who doesn't learn out asay docha lo saseh from Metzora, will learn it out from tzitzis. Incredible. We'll say, let's just go a little bit weiter. Just cover a little bit of ground. Tomorrow is a longer daf, so we'll cover a little bit of ground tomorrow. This is Amar Mar, the kulam shegilchu shelo betar, o sheshayru shtei saros. Lo asav lo klum. So I'll say, interesting enough, the Gemara says. Now, so we're transitioning a little bit over here. Anytime that the Metzora, right, or the Nazir for that matter, went ahead and left over shegilchu shelo betar, didn't use a razor, or left over 2 hairs. Lo asav lo klum. So I will say, now we're transitioning over here to the actual shaving process. If in the shaving process the individual left unshaved 2 hairs or more, the shaving is ineffective. Amar Vachra B'Reidar Ika. So it's very interesting. Zosomeres rubo kikulo midaraisa. This is incredible. What do you learn from here? Learn from here that in general, the concept in halacha is rubo kikulo, which means what? Majority is like the whole. Now, where do you learn that out from? Midigali rachmana gabe nazir b'yom hashvi yigalchenu hachahu da'adi ikakulo haba'alma rubo kikulo. So I will say this is fascinating. From the fact that the Torah has to make a drasha, I will say, right, the drasha over here is by the Mitzorah, bayom hashvini yigalchenu. So I will say that's the drasha. The drasha is yigalchenu means you have to shave. And what do you have to shave? What do you have to shave? What do you have to shave? Everything. Meaning what? That if you leave unshaved 2 hairs or more, that invalidates the shaving. Now we'll say, take a quick look at the Rashi for just a moment. This is the first Rashi on the daf. Rashi says, Midigali Rachmana, Kabi Nazir Meshi Yigalchenu, V'lo Itztirich. Truth is, this pasuk I will say that on day number 7 you have to shave is really unnecessary. Why? The Kvar Ksiv, the Galach Es Rosho. The Gilach Es Rosho. So I will say, the Torah already said that the Nazir, that the Mitzvah has to shave his head. We already had this. We already had this. It's unnecessary to repeat Ubayom Hashvi Biyom Hashvi Yigalchenu. So I will say, so why is it repeated? Elashmoinon, reading the Rush, Deba'inon Taglachas Shlema, Shelo Yishayir Klum, Haba'alma Rubokikulo. I will say, this is absolutely incredible. So watch this. Let's just follow the progression over here. We're introduced to the halacha. I will say, what's the halacha? If you're a mitzorah, you shaved your head, and you left over 2 hairs unshaved, what's the halacha? You've invalidated your shaving. Now I will say, let's go out of order. Where do we learn this from? Where do we learn it from? Bayom hashvi'i yigalchenu. On 7th day, he has to shave. That phrase is redundant. Why? Because the Torah already told us that the Nazir has to shave. So why is the Torah Kedosha repeating it? So the Gemara is understanding why. To place an emphasis. What's the emphasis on? That what do you have to shave? What do you have to shave? Everything. Apparently there's some margin of error. What can you leave over? 1 hair. 1 hair. Right? But anything more than 1 hair, 2 hairs or more, invalidated. So the reinforcement of Bayom Shvi Yigalchenu is to reinforce the fact that you cannot leave over anything. Now, here's what's interesting. So what the Gemara is dashing over here is the fact that the Torah has to say Bayom Shvi Yigalchenu, right, teaches me that what? So I will say, let's stop for just a moment. Without that pasuk, Yom Shvi Yigalchenu, what would I have thought? I would have thought Rubo Kikulo, that as long as the Nazir the Mitzorah shaves most of his head, right, we're good to go. Rove is a principle that guides us in most of halacha. So the fact that the Torah has to say Yom Shvi Yigalchenu comes to teach us that no, it's dafka here that he has to shave everything. Without this pasuk, we normally assume in other areas of halacha that what? Majority is just fine. Rubo kikulo. So listen to this. So the Gemara says, Midigali Rachmana Gabe Nazir. Sorry, I keep saying Mitzor. Gabe Nazir Biyom Hashvi Yigalchenu. Since the Torah says, I will say, I'm sorry. This is by Nazir Tameh, right? The Nazir, we're going to see a lot of these halachas are interchangeable, right? But the Nazir Tameh, right, which is the person who's in the middle of his Neder Nazirus, he becomes Tameh. Now I will say, now what happens? He has to undergo the entire process. Gay purification, shaving. So the Torah says by the Nazir Yigalchenu, hachahu da'adi ikakulo. So I will say it's dafka here where he has to shave everything. Haba'alma rubo kikulo. I will say, but without this drasha, I would have said what? Majority is like everything. Good. So I will say that's the drasha. So you understand what's happening over here? Torah introducing us to this concept. Ultimately, again, Bayom Hashvi'i Yigalchenu. So again, I'm sorry, let me reorient ourselves a little bit. This is talking about the Nazir who became Tameh. Nazir became Tameh. Remember what happens? What happens if your Nazir become Tameh? You have to go ahead and essentially observe your days of Tara, then shave, restart your Neder Nazirus. So therefore, the Torah is telling me that halacha l'maisa, if when shaving he left over 2 hairs or more, he invalidates the shaving. Why? Because the Torah goes out of its way to say B'yom hashvi yigalchenu, to say that you need a full shaving. Had it not said this, I would have said Rubo Kikulo. Fine. So we'll say, watch this. Rabbi Chanina, 1 second. Hi bin Nazir Tamei Ksiv. Rabbi Chanina said, why you bring a raya for this? this is written by a Nazir Tameh. As we just said before, Rabbi said, look at the Rush. Hay be Nazir Tameh ksiv, hayigachenu demashma kulo, umas nisin katani af Nazir tahar, beisas makvos. The Rabbi said, now halacha l'maisa, the brisa that we quoted before was talking about a Nazir tahar, a regular Nazir, that if a Nazir at the end of his neder Naziris leaves over 2 hairs, he's invalidated his entire shaving. But you bring a raya from where? From where? From Nazir Tameh. So how can you bring a raya from Nazir Tameh to Nazir Tahar? So I will say, listen to this. Machku alav b'ma'arava. After Rabbi Yosef Hanina said this, they laughed at him in Eretz Yisrael. Right? When he said this, they laughed at him. Right? They mocked this question. Michti Nazir Tameh dibitar minalan. So I said, let's just a moment. From where do we know that a Nazir Tameh goes ahead and shaves his head with a razor? Where do we learn it out from? Be Nazir Tar Yalif. We also learn it out from Nazir Tar. Leisi Nazir Tar v'leilif mi Nazir Tameh. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, the same way that we learn out Nazir Tameh from Nazir Tar from Nazir Tameh when it comes to razor. So too we can learn out Nazir Tar from Nazir Tameh when it comes to leaving over unshaved hairs. Mat Tameh. Just like by Nazir Tameh, ultimately, again, if he leaves over 2 hairs, he invalidates the shaving. So obviously the Gemara says, so too by Nazir Tar, if you leave over 2 hairs, halacha l'maisa, you've done nothing as well. So I will say, so watch what's happening over here. So the Gemara introduced, just to kind of solidify the flow. So the Gemara introduces the concept that if a Nazir Tahar, at the end of his purification process, goes ahead and leaves 2 hairs uncut, the shaving is invalid. Where does the Gemara prove that from? Where's the Gemara prove it from? From the pasuk of B'yom Hashvi'i Yigachenu. Yigachenu reinforcing he has to shave. Why does it have to say he has to shave? It's reinforcing that he has to shave everything. But yet, Rabbi say, where is that written? By Nazir Tameh. Rabbi Yossi says, 1 second, how can you bring a proof from Nazir Tameh to Nazir Tahar? They laughed at him in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi say, why did they laugh at him? Because Lamaisa, what are you talking about? That's what we've been doing this entire time. Essentially what we do is we create a halachic bridge between Nazir Tameh and Nazir Tahar and learn out halachos one from the other. For example, from where do we know ultimately again that Nazir uses a razor? We learn out from Nazir Tahar. But we apply that to Nazir Tameh as well. And so too, just like a Nazir Tameh, if he leaves over 2 hairs, halacha l'maisa, the shaving is invalid. So too by Nazir Tahar, if he leaves over 2 hairs, ultimately the shaving is invalid. As Rabbi said, just mentioned on this concept of rubo kikulo. It's interesting, I will say, that, the Gemara is assuming over here that this is the exception to the rule. Normally, halacha l'maisa, we would hold rubo kikulo, right? The majority counts as the whole. This is the exception. I will say, the concept of rubo kikulo is absolutely true in halacha. It's interesting to ponder whether it applies hashkafa l'maisa, right? Halacha l'maisa it applies. Hashkafa l'maisa, I will say, rubo kikulo, I was thinking about this, sometimes we paskin, sometimes we don't paskin. For example, sometimes a person starts something in life. Right? So I will say, and what happens? We know this happens to all of us. You get started on something, and it's exciting when you start it. And where do you get to? Rubo, right? I go ahead and I accomplish a lot, I finish a lot, but I haven't quite gotten to the finish line. And what do we often tell ourselves? No problem. How do we paskin? Rubo kikulo. I would say it's not true in life initiatives, right? Again, I would say that the proof to this is, the Torah tells us that Yoshua, right, credits Yoshua with burying the Atzmos Yosef in Shechem, in Eretz Yisrael. And yet again, the Gemara says, but 1 second, Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who retrieved the remains of Yosef from Mitzrayim, carried them through the deserts. Why does Yoshua get credit for it? And what's essentially what the Gemara says is, at the end of the day, who gets credit for any life initiative? The one who finishes. Starting is very nice. Starting is very beautiful. But success in life is not gauged by what you start. Success in life is gauged by what you finish. And that's why rubo kikulo, we paskin that way halacha l'maisa, but we don't paskin that way hashkafa l'maisa. Hashkafa l'maisa, when do you finish something, Rabbi say? when you finish it, right? And this is so important because our life closets are filled with so many, partially started or partially completed life initiatives. Because whatever the reason, so often we just lack the drive to get things to the finish line. And it's such an important yesod in life accomplishment. You start something, you finish it. You find some way to bring it to completion. Rubo Kikulo applies for the Nazir, but it doesn't apply in our life initiatives. We'll stop over here for today. Let's do Mesilas Yesharim for a couple of minutes. We'll say today is our second to last year of Mesilas Yesharim. Tomorrow we complete the Sefer Meretz Hashem. So let's finish a little bit. We only have a short section today. All right, we'll say, so we are picking up in Meretz Hashem at the end of Perek Chav Vav. The end of Perek Chav Vav. End of Perek Chav Vav. So we'll say, so listen to this. So the Ramchal writes as follows. He says, V'ata korei noim. Ata korei noim. Ata korei noim. So we'll say, end of Perek Chav Vav. Say, I always feel bad when people leave for the Ramchal. I think, again, just people, Steve, sit down, right? You have 10 minutes. You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. I know it's something when everybody has places to go. I always struggle with this. Sometimes I think therefore we should do Mesilas Yesharim first. It seems like such an awkward thing. Like, hey, we're going to do Mesilas Yesharim, right? The Exodus, right? I seriously, so like this is Dvarim Ha'omdim Barumo Shah. I waited dafka till everyone left except for Steve. Right? So. But again, it's so you can't live. You can't be a functional human being without Ramchal. You cannot be a functional person without the Ramchal. So we'll say what the Ramchal says. Short piece today. V'ata korei noim. So we'll say this is now the end of the section. He says, let me just see where we stop. Where did we stop over here today? Okay, I just want to see. Sorry. Amar HaMachaber. Okay, good. V'ata korei noim. Yadati, I know. Shekamoni Teida. Asher lo kilisi b'sifrei zeh kol hachasidus. So we'll say, now listen to this. So the Ramchal says as follows. The Ramchal says, please know that we have by no means, we have in no way talked about everything. Right? We have not gone through all the different pillars of Chasidus. And he's using that as a catch-all phrase. And I have not said everything that there is to say about Kiddush, about any particular midah. Ki ein ledavar sof. So we'll say this is like his disclaimer at the end of the Sefer, right? At the end of the Sefer, he says, I just have to tell you, as exhaustive and as expansive and as thorough as this Sefer has been, I've not gotten through everything. I just haven't gotten through everything. He says, I've said a little bit, on each component of the Braisa, Pinchas ben Yair, upon which this Sefer has been created. So Ramchal says, my goal is to start a conversation. Right? My goal is to spark a process. Right? My goal is to begin something, to begin you thinking in something. Kevan shenigle darkam v'nichtach archam le'einenu v'alech bam b'derech mishar. Ve'al kol kiyotze bazen ne'emar yishma chacham v'yosef lekach v'novon tachbulis yikneh v'abalatar mesayim oso ki Hashem yitin chacham v'piv dasu svuna lahaishir ish es darko nebaro. Shabbos said, this is incredible. The Ramchal says, my entire purpose is just to begin a process, but in no way assume that this is the end of the process. In no way assume that what I've given you is the totality of what it takes to become a fully actualized Yid. And that's what he says over here. Habolatar Messiah Moso. My goal is to plot you on a course. You continue, learn more, do more. V'zeh pashat. So we'll say this, and this is going to end. This is incredible. He says, V'zeh pashat. Ki kol ha'adam lafi ha'amanos asher biyado, va'esek asher hu osek, Kach sarich lo hayishara v'adracha. Rabbi say this is incredible, and this is what makes Ramchal such a real sefer. Ramchal says so much of the application of the tenets of Mesilas Yesharim really depends on your lifestyle, on how you live, on what you do, and what your profession is, what the demands of your time are, what the constraints of your lifestyle are. He says, for example, Ki derech hachasidus haroi lemisha tarasa umnaso. Eino derech hachasidus haroi lemi shetzarich lahaskir atzmon lechas chaveiro. I will say someone who learns all day, his path to actualize his inner chasidus, his inner piety, is going to be different than someone who works for someone else. And I will say, the pathway to piety for someone who's his own man and does business is going to be different than someone who works for someone, and different for someone who learns all day. Kol echad ve'echad lefi mashehu re'uyim lo derech. I will say this is such a profound statement. The Ramchal says, "I wrote a sefer." He'll say, you know what the beauty of writing a sefer is. The beauty of writing a sefer is you have it, it's there, and it can serve as a guide. What's the problem with writing a sefer? A sefer is not organic, right? With the written word, all you could express is one thing. Maybe you could, insinuate something else. Rabbi Soloveitchik did not write Svarim. He didn't write Svarim. Now it's interesting, there's new Svarim coming out from the Rav like every week. He's been gone for 20 years, but he's still publishing new Svarim. It's incredible. Let's say, so why did the Rav never publish Svarim? Because the Rav felt that Torah is organic and ever evolving. The written word is static. It's static, right? It is what it is. So that's the Ramchal is expressing over here. I'm writing concepts, but the application of those concepts, the actualization of those concepts, they're going to look different for different people. How to become a chassid for a guy who learns the whole day is going to be fundamentally different than becoming a chassid for a guy who works the whole day. And I was saying the beauty of the Ramchal is both of them have the same obligation, which is what? To become a chassid. Isn't that beautiful? Right? Just because you have a day job, maybe even a very demanding day job, you still have an obligation to become a chassid. Just like a person has an obligation to become a Talmud Chacham, even if they're a balabas. These are not mutually exclusive states. But the actualization of it is going to become fundamentally different depending on who and what you are. He goes on, he says, Lo lefi shach chasidus mishtana. It's not because the tenets of chasidus change. Ki hine hu shava lechol nefesh v'dai. They both say the basic tenets, as we learned before, what it takes to become a chassid are the same for every person. Ho'il ve'eineno ela lasos ma sheish nachas ruach liyos rabo. Shabbos says, focusing back on chasidus. Shabbos say, remember again, going back to a chassid. Shabbos says, you're seeing that tzaddik and a chassid according to Rabbi Chai. Remember, you're seeing that tzaddik and a chassid, little chazara. What does a tzaddik do? Right? A tzaddik does what is expected of him. What does a chassid do? A chassid goes above and beyond. A chassid intuits what is the Ratzon Hashem. The chassid understands mitzvos are an expression of divine will. Mitzvos teach me what God likes. So the chassid says, now that I know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu likes, I'm going to go above and beyond. So Rabbi say, that's the goal of every single chassid. To give nachas ruach to Hashem, aval hoyel, v'anosim mishtanim, iafshar shalishtanu gamem tzem hamagim osim ala tachlis. Rabbi say, but since people's circumstances are different, so therefore again the vehicle to the actualization of Chassidus is going to change person to person as well. Kol echad lefi inyano ukivar yochel lios chassid gomer ishim neitzar ko hu bal malacha b'chusa kimo shemilo asher lo yafsik mipi alimud. So Rabbi said, this is so beautiful. The Ramchal says that's why whether a person has a particular job, and maybe that job itself is maybe even like a very lowly profession, right? That lowly profession, that guy can become a chassid just as much as the person who's sitting in the Beis Medrash and learning Torah all day. Because of Kol pala shelamaneu va'omer b'chol drachacha da'ehu v'hu yashar chasecha. We'll say that pasuk so beautifully, right? Ultimately, b'chol dracha, know Hashem in all of your ways. We'll say, is this not the most incredible and beautiful thing you've ever heard? And we'll say, this is Ramchal. Yiddishkeit is not an elitist religion. We do not believe that only Talmidei Chachamim have cornered the market on God or closeness to God. Every single person has the ability to be a chassid. Every single person has the ability to spiritually self-actualize. Every single person has the ability to give HaKadosh Baruch Hu nachas ruach. The difference is, we all do it in different ways. Ish lefi ma'ale, ish kol b'chol drachacha, ish lefi palo. We'll say it's finished up, last paragraph. Hu yisparach shmo b'rachamov, yifkach einenu b'saraso. So we'll say, I just want to point out, this technically is the last paragraph in Mesilas Yesharim proper. Tomorrow we're going to see there's a chasima, there's a conclusion. We're going to get to that in Meretz Hashem. But I will say, look how he ends off. This is just so beautiful. Hu yisbarach shemo b'rachamav yifkach einino b'saraso. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should open our eyes with his Torah. V'yareinu d'rakav should show us his ways. V'yalonichinu ba'archosav should go ahead and lead us in his pathways. V'niske laseis kavod l'shmo, we should be zocher to give kavod to the name of Hashem. V'lasos nachas ruach lefanav, and to give nachas to the Ribbono Shel Olam. Yehi chavod Hashem li'olam, yismach Hashem b'ma'asav. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu's honor, may his kavod endure for all eternity, and may Hashem forever be happy with all of his creations with us. Yismach Yisrael ba'osav, may Klal Yisrael find joy in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ba'osav, right? Yismach Yisrael ba'osav, b'nei Tzion yagil malkam, may the children of Tzion rejoice in their King. Amen, amen, amen. You know what I'm saying? Incredible. So today, again, we end with tomorrow. We're not finished. Tomorrow, Meretz Hashem. Tomorrow we have the Chasima. Tomorrow we have the conclusion of Hashem. We'll say, Shemay Shekayach. Have a great day, everyone.
What I get for wearing an orange?
You stood out. You stood out.
Oh, real quick.
You're welcome.
Matanas Levionim.
Yes.
That's not from Meister. That's from